I met my great-grandfather once, a few years before he died when he was ill. I was quite young, and I recall almost nothing of that visit. I do not recall his face nor his voice, but he had terrible scars on his bald head. He got them as a young man, beaten with axe handles by Pinkerton goons hired to break up a strike early in the 20th century. Had things gone just a little differently, I would not be here today. For decades, we have been told lies about labor, just as we have been told lies about urban, mostly Black or Latino communities, to justify the unspeakable brutality, cruelty, and killings of those people. Just like what's going on now in DC and probably soon in Chicago and Baltimore, was going on in LA, maybe again. Those same lies, those same kinds of lies were told about unions and union organizers, because in this country, unions are the only thing that has ever created a substantially better life for average people, for working people. If you are not a union member or have never been able to be a union member, you have nevertheless been lifted in this life by unions. Yes, unions are imperfect, just like governments and businesses and churches, because all of them are run by fallible, broken, biased human beings. But we still have all those things because we need them. Unions gave us, among many other things, the 8-hour workday as opposed to 12 or 14, vacations, sick time, decent wages, safer working conditions, the weekend, child labor laws. Those things were not gifts from the capitalists nor from the government. They were demanded and fought for and paid for in blood. Now, my sons did not learn about their great-great-grandfather until they were preteens. We stopped going to the nearby grocery stores that we always went to, the ones with the familiar brands where we knew where to find everything, and they wanted to know why. So I told them his story so they would understand. There was, at that moment, a strike going on, and I will not ever cross a picket line. Ever. I don't care what the issues are. I don't care what the grievances are, or even if I agree with the union on this one, because I know how very little leverage working people have in order to get a fair deal or a decent wage. If they are not unionized, they have none. An individual cannot negotiate on fair and equitable terms with a corporation. The idea of that is the most absurd nonsense. But a union can. And I will not undercut that just and equalizing power. I have changed hotels because I discovered there was a labor dispute. I didn't enter the lobby. I just called and canceled my reservation and went elsewhere and let them know why. It was inconvenient for me. Probably cost me more money, but I don't recall. But it was not nearly as inconvenient as walking a strike line in the hot sun or the cold for hours, or from taking abuse from managers, or the loss of pay, which is, of course, no trivial issue when most working folk are only a paycheck away from disaster. We do not usually know the names of working people, and we don't even know the stories of famous strikes or labor actions, of which there were hundreds or thousands in this country and still are. Because that history is not taught to us, the wealthy and the powerful don't like it when people talk about those events. They would prefer that we not know that history, because history tells us who we have been, who we are, what we've done, and what we could be, what we could do again. If the past can be buried, then those who were murdered can be silenced. The robber barons can be more comfortable because people without heroes don't look for new ones to arise. How many of you here have ever heard of the Ludlow Massacre? A few. In 1914, over 200 people were killed, miners and their wives and their children, because of a strike. They were killed by the hired thugs and the Colorado National Guard. The company's president, John D. Rockefeller Jr., was highly criticized for the massacre, and that is all the justice that was ever dished out to the owners and executives who oversaw mass murder. In the congressional investigation that followed, John D. Rockefeller Sr. said that even knowing that the guards in his employ had committed atrocities against the strikers, he would not have taken any action to stop them. At the site of the massacre, there is now a monument owned by the United Mine Workers of America. And archaeological work that's been done there has generally supported the accounts of the surviving miners. I could give dozens of other examples like this one. Dozens, scores. What unions did was to create the American middle class. As unions rose in power and demanded decent wages, we saw the growth of the middle class, working people able to buy homes and cars and more. With the decline of unions, we saw the growing requirement for two-earner families just to make ends meet. With families more and more unable to buy the same houses or cars or go on vacation or unable to afford to send their children to college. Breaking the unions allowed what may be the greatest theft in American history, other than the theft of a continent of native land. I'm speaking of the minimum wage, which was supposed to be a living wage, and in 1972 it was. Today, to have the same buying power, the minimum wage would have to be $26 an hour. Check your wallets, check your purses. They have been picked for decades and decades. All that wealth has been stolen from all of us and transferred to the obscenely wealthy. Now, how, you may ask, is this a religious issue? Well, we as a faith are committed to justice and to equity and to our interdependence. A day's work should provide more than enough money to sustain a decent life in what is still the wealthiest nation on earth. The minimum wage does not approach that standard. We support a living wage, a wage that meets, among other things, the biblical admonition that the workman is worthy of his wages. The idea that the just treatment of labor is a religious ideal and an obligation is an ancient one shared by many faiths, and it is one we remain dedicated to. The problem in our society is not that the poor are getting too much, but that they and almost all of us are getting far less than a just society would insist we all deserve. And that, as in biblical times, the wealthy are becoming ever more appallingly rich, by abusing the poor, widows, orphans, and strangers, meaning immigrants. And in the end, such concern is not simply about justice, but peace, because there is only one historical answer to ever increasing inequality, to the abuse of the poor, and that has been revolution. Violent and destructive revolution. You know, eat the rich. There are lines that should not be crossed. There are things that should never be done. In this faith, we preach ethics and values and insist that each of us must find the truth as we know it and then live by it. I will not cross a picket line. I will not support a politician who won't fight for a decent living wage for every person. I will not sit quiet while workers are put at risk so that corporations can make even more money. Martin Luther King is usually remembered for leading a great struggle for racial justice in this country, and that work is so far from being done. But he also led a great struggle for labor justice and was murdered while leading the Poor People's Campaign, which was against both racism and poverty. The two are tightly interwoven, and like King, I do not believe that we can correct one without correcting the other. The beloved community demands that people have meaningful work at living wages with a secure and adequate income for all of those who are unable to find work or to do a job. It insists that access to land for economic purposes be realistically possible, that the poor and people of all ethnicities and identities have access to capital with which they can create and build their own businesses and lives, and that ordinary people be able to play a truly significant role in government. Those are the goals of the Poor People's Campaign, and they are still ours to help fulfill today. On this Labor Day, let us celebrate and remember all who have struggled so hard and so long, sometimes sacrificing their lives, to give us the lives and comforts we do enjoy, to remember and acknowledge those who are injured and dispossessed today, too often so that others can live in wealth and comfort and not know what to do with all of their money, and to commit to the actions and the kinds of lives that will achieve the beloved community. May it be so.